Never Grow Up by Kulichana on Ubuntu Radio. My name is Thaninga. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are now on the second hour of the show. Those who were listening in the past hour, we were with Vota Kellerman speaking about his music, his collaborations, and other work that he did outside the country. That was a cultural diplomacy. Now we're getting into serious issues. You know that on this hour, we look into issues of diplomacy. And today, I am glad to host in studio once again Ambassador Shope Linney. She was here some time ago. We had a good chat, and she's back again. It means like
absolutely. Good morning.
Because she wouldn't be coming back if I did not treat her well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.
And welcome home. It's good to have you home.
Thank you very much. It's always lovely to be back home.
Lovely. So, would you maybe just talk us through some of the developments that took place in Havana since we last spoke? Some of the key events that are worth mentioning.
Well, I must say that Cuba is going through a very difficult time at the moment. And the major reason really is that the new administration of the U.S. is tightening the sanctions on Cuba. As we know, before, during the time of President Barack Obama, they'd already started thawing the relationships between the two countries, but now they're going back to the freezer, if I could put it in that way. So the situation is not easy. There's been a lot of restrictions in terms of tourism, and we both know that Cuba gets a lot of money through tourism. So there's a number of restrictions in terms of tourism. We used to have the huge yachts coming into the country, which have now been stopped. So it has a serious impact on the income that comes in through tourism. But the Cubans are a very resilient people, and they are really surviving, and they continue to survive. I mean, they've been in this situation for more than 60 years. So they are used to the hardships that they're going through. They are used to fighting to survive. And I think the most important thing that the Cubans have is the pride in being Cuban, their patriotism, and really that is what makes Cubans survive. Pride in being Cuban, pride in surviving, and never giving up.
We recently saw China and Cuba signing some agreements on economic cooperation. Do you think that will be bringing in some change in the Cuban shores?
Well, logically, any cooperation that Cuba can get with any friendly country will go a long way in assisting the country economically. Whether we are looking at agriculture, you're looking at tourism and hospitality, you are looking, whatever field you look at, any kind of assistance would really help the country. And that is what the Cuban government is doing at the moment, talking to friendly countries like South Africa to assist in increasing the investments between the two countries so that we can be able to assist Cuba economically, particularly. Politically, our relations are untouchable. They're very good. But economically, as South Africa, we really do need to increase our investments in Cuba, and particularly small business, because Cuba is not a country of multinationals. So it survives mostly on small business. So the small business sector of South Africa would do well in engaging Cuba in terms of business exchanges. So that would go a long way in assisting the Cuban people and the Cuban government.
Are there any deliberations with regards to that, getting people to exchange ideas and opportunities in the small business area between South Africa and Cuba?
Yes, on a yearly basis, South Africa and Cuba hold bilateral meetings where we exchange, we take a look at progress that we've made economically, what is the agreements that we signed between the two countries. We've just had the last one last week where the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba was here, and he had discussions with our vice minister and logically the Cuban ambassador here, where we had exchanges in terms of where it is that we need to tighten up economically between the two countries, what is it that we need to be looking at, and logically looking at issues of how can we even better, even more, the relations that tie the two countries, because as I said before, our relations are really very, very, very good. So that kind of consultative meetings that we, the joint consultative meeting that we have at that level ministerially, assist a lot in paving the way forward in terms of what it is that we need to be looking at with regard logically to assisting Cuba and also Cuba assisting us as South Africa, because it has to be a win-win situation between the two countries.
Are there any specific industries that you would encourage South Africans to look into investing in with regard to small business?
Absolutely. My big priority really is agriculture. If we can look at really forming huge, big relations, agriculturally between the two countries, because Cuba is in need of developing more its agricultural sector. We are looking at hospitality. Cuba is a tourism country. There is a lot that we can be able to do as a country with regard to not only the upgrading and refurbishment of Cuban hotels, but also in terms of hotel management and the service industry. That's a huge opportunity for South Africa. At the present point in time, we're also looking at a larger scale, we are looking at construction and maintenance of airports. Cuba is looking at building a few more airports, particularly in its tourist areas where they're becoming now international airports. So they have approached South Africa, the airports company South Africa. They were there about 3 weeks ago to look at what kind of a relationship we can have. And logically, we're going to have to tender, like all the other companies that will be tendering for those type of contracts. So yes, there is a lot that can be done between the two countries. And the ones that I've mentioned are really in particular where I'd like to have a lot of priority. But logically, there's also the issue of culture, the area of culture. Cuba is a very, very culture-conscious nation, whether you're talking arts and culture in all forms. Cuba is a sporting country. So those are all relations that we can be able to enter into between the two countries and develop there where we already are, but develop even further in terms of the interactions between the two of us.
You made emphasis on the issue of tourism being affected greatly by what is happening across the globe with regard to Cuba. Are there any specific areas of concern that you think they need to be addressed to get Cuba back into its feet, tourism-wise?
Tourism is about people traveling. So what we need to do as South Africa is to have a little bit more of marketing and promoting Cuba as a tourist destination. Logically, you will have more possibilities of South Africans traveling to Cuba for tourism rather than the other way around. Cubans do not have so much disposable income, so we will be looking more at taking delegations from this side. And here we can be looking at packages, where you can say, a group of people travel from South Africa and they go to Cuba, but in the process they can also maybe visit Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago or even the US. So there is already quite a lot of traffic in terms of South African tourists going to that part of the world, the region, Americas and the Caribbean. But there isn't a lot of knowledge about Cuba as a tourism destination. And logically, it is also because of the negative publicity that Cuba has from the countries that are not so friendly with Cuba. So many people do not really know that Cuba is actually an excellent tourism destination. So many people would encourage many people that when traveling to that part of the world, they also travel to Cuba and see for themselves what a lovely country Cuba is. And Cuba also is an extremely, extremely safe country. In Cuba, you can walk at 4 a.m. in the morning and not even have to look back. You don't have to worry that something is going to happen to you. It's a very, very safe country. And Cuba is a country that is, I would put it amongst the first in the world in terms of the protection of women and women's rights. So Cuba is a fantastic destination actually to visit, to learn a lot from. There's a lot that can be learned from the Cuban delegation and the Cuban country. But also I think that the one other thing that we should not forget to mention is that we have a lot of South African students who are studying medicine currently in Cuba, just like we have Cuban doctors here. Last year, we had 704 students who finished their 5th year in Cuba and are going to doing their 6th year in South Africa. This year, we had 638. So that is already more than 1,000 doctors more for our country. And all of these students learn the Cuban way of medicine, which is well renowned. I mean, many people will not want to recognize it because they don't want to give Cuba that credit. But Cuba has got their system of teaching medicine is preventative. It's not curative where you go to the doctor when you're already sick. That type of medicine teaches you how not to get sick so that you don't have to end up being sick and going to the doctor. And I think many countries in the world are already looking, even South Africa, are already looking at changing their medical system to that one of Cuba. And as we know, Cuban doctors are all over the world. If they were not that good, they would not be all over the world. So we are very proud of the fact that we have many of our students who are graduating in Cuba and coming to contribute to our society, because medicines on doctors is one of the things that we really, really need in our country.
Very much true. in terms of tourism, just to sum it up, as a mission, South African mission in Cuba, have you considered ways of collaborating, probably maybe with a South African tourism or brand South Africa, just to have some maybe familiarization tours, exchange between the two countries, so we can promote the tourism element of it and let people know about what each country has to offer?
Totally and absolutely. And I think one of the things that we are really looking at is to get the two ministers together. The Minister of Tourism of Cuba has never been to South Africa. So they've got no idea of what it is that can be able to gain from South Africa. And not only from people traveling to South Africa, but also gaining from what to do in the tourism industry, in the Cuban tourism industry. As I said, tourism is the greatest income generator for Cuba, but also getting our Minister of Tourism to go to Cuba and to look at the two ministers in the two countries, to look at different packages that can be developed for the two countries where we can be able to exchange in many ways. We have the tourism in Daba. I think it's one of the things that we can be inviting the minister to come and experience, and that will give them also a lot of ideas in terms of what to do and how to get this whole exchange going.
I think that is a great opportunity. One person who goes to tourism in Daba almost every year. We broadcast live from the event, and we have people who are coming, say for example, international buyers who are coming from other countries just to experience what South Africa has to offer. And apart from attending the event itself, they get an opportunity to travel across South Africa, and they got split in groups. Some would go to the Western Cape, some would go to Limpopo, some would go elsewhere and get to experience what South Africa has to offer. It's easy for them to go back and sell the product that they have experienced. And just to kill those thoughts that South Africa is a dangerous place to be, because that's one thing that would make people not want to travel to our shores. Let's take a short break. As we return, we'll be continuing with the diplomat. I am with Ambassador Shope, Linney, the ambassador of South Africa to Cuba. Remember, you get us through DSTV, channel 888, online, ubunturadio.com. You can also download a TuneIn app on your smartphone and listen to Ubuntu Radio. Follow us on social media at official Ubuntu Radio ZA on Instagram and Ubuntu Radio ZA on Facebook, at Ubuntu Radio ZA on Twitter. If you have just joined us, we are in a conversation with Ambassador Shope Linney, who is representing South Africa in Cuba, and she is also accredited to the Dominican Republic. Ambassador, there is a plan to unveil a Mandela bust soon in Havana. Please tell us more about this plan.
Yes, we were supposed to have unveiled the Mandela bust actually last year, but due to circumstances beyond all of our control, we did not manage to. We are planning to unveil it this year in November, and we are hoping that one of our principals is going to visit Havana at that time, because we are really trying to get to have it to have South Africa represented at the highest level possible to unveil the bust. And also we are doing that in commemoration of the 25 years of relations between the two countries, South Africa and Cuba, but also the 500th anniversary of Havana, which is being also celebrated this year. And there'll be a number of activities during the month of November that will be commemorating all of these elements. So yes, we will be unveiling the Mandela bust. And I'm happy to say that the park where the Mandela bust is going to be placed, we already have the bust of Oliver Tambo.
Wow, amazing.
So South Africa will be represented, two leaders.
In Havana.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe let's talk about the South African diaspora in Cuba. Apart from the student doctors, do we see more people living that side of...
In terms of people like normal citizens leaving their country to go and live in Cuba, no, you do not have that. But what I must hurry on to say is that in terms of diplomatic representation, Cuba, I think, is the fourth largest in the region after the United States, Canada, Brazil, and then Cuba. Cuba is one of the few countries in the region that we have a representation at the moment of 27 African countries is very rare. Usually in the region, except for the countries that I've already mentioned, you are lucky if you have 9 or 10. So Cuba were 27 ambassadors from the African continent. And it's a very, very, very active country. I mean, Cuba, you never have time to rest. There's always something happening. And the relationship that Cuba has with African countries is totally unquestionable. I mean, there's also another. It's like a monument that serves the Cubans who passed away in battle on the African continent. It's a huge monument with beautiful, beautiful history. So, yeah, the relationship that Cuba has with Africa is really undeniable. And every year they celebrate with us Africa Day, May 25. And it's really a huge, huge, huge event. So the relationships that Cuba has with us, and particularly South Africa, I must say, South Africa, Angola, many other African countries, the relationship is really, it's an untouchable relationship.
You mentioned that you never rest in Cuba. It's always busy, and you've just mentioned that they celebrate with us Africa Day. What other activities or events are normally celebrated in Cuba with relation to Africa or South Africa, to be specific?
Well, logically, Cuba will look at other, like for example, with us, August 9, we will have an activity with the Federation of Cuban Women to celebrate the month of South African women. But Cuba does that with all the other African countries too. You have the commemoration, for example, of the Battle of Quito Carnavale, which was celebrating the 30th anniversary last year, where the South African apartheid regime was defeated by the Cubans in Angola. So they've got a lot of commemorations with countries like Namibia. The first Cuba, just after the Cuban Revolution, the first Cubans to assist were sent to Algeria. So we have a lot of bilateral relations where you look at Cuba and different African countries where there's a lot to celebrate. We had Che Guevara fighting in the Congo with the Cubans in the Congo. So there's a lot to commemorate that Cuba has, not only with South Africa, but also with the different African countries that exist. And all of them have got different days of their own countries that we celebrate all of us together as the African community. And I must really hasten to say that the African community, the diplomatic community in Cuba is extremely supportive of each other. We all attend each other's events and we always support each other in each and every endeavor that we do.
That's amazing. It's good, and it shows unity amongst African countries.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier the celebration of the 25 years of South African democracy, as well as the relations between South Africa and Cuba. Maybe just take us back on how we relate in that regard. How are the diplomatic relations between South Africa and Cuba?
Well, the diplomatic relations between us two started off, or I think the height of their excellence can be defined in the names of Fidel Castro and Nelson Mandela. And spiraling down from there, it's at all levels, our relations. We support each other in various projects. And as I said before, you have Cuban doctors who are serving in South Africa. You have Cuban technicians who are serving in South Africa. You have Cubans from the education department who are serving in South Africa. We have Cubans at all levels serving in South Africa. But as I said, at the same time, we have our own students from South Africa who are studying medicine, in Cuba and other technical subjects that the South African students are doing in Cuba. So our relations really, I mean, we define as DIRCO, as Foreign Affairs, our policy with Cuba. We call Cuba, or we define our relationship with Cuba as a relationship of a strategic nature. Cubans are our strategic partners. And in that strategic partnership, we look at our responsibility as South Africa to guide our foreign policy in terms of Cuba. And our foreign policy is not just any other foreign policy. It is a foreign policy that looks at the fact that Cuba was there for South Africa at our darkest hour. They were there. They assisted us. They assisted South Africa in many ways. At the present point in time now, it is now the turn of South Africa to look at how it is that we will be able to assist Cuba. We shouldn't look at Cuba in a sense of saying we do not get any return on investment from Cuba, so we are not going to look at prioritizing our investment relations with Cuba. Ours is a responsibility to ensure that now we should be the ones who should be taking the upper hand in terms of assisting Cuba in this time of need that Cuba has. So our relationships really are really, really excellent, politically, economically, socially, etc.
We have strong ties indeed. And you also spoke about the 500 anniversary of Cuba.
Havana.
Of Havana. Let's talk about that.
Cuba, in celebration of Havana, Cuba is looking at, I can basically say celebrations from A to Z. I mean, looking at uh, film, looking at arts, looking at different types of culture, looking at the development from an architectural point of view. Where did Havana come from? There's a part in Havana that is called Old Havana. And that section, they have not touched or they have not changed in all of these years. There's distinct architecture that you have. And so they usually, it's one of the great tourism places that you can go to. Old Havana is just amazing. So you go and you actually live what Havana used to be like so many years back. And where Havana, it's almost like Havana has stood in time and not changed. People always marvel at, for example, the old American cars that still run the streets of Cuba, and they are used now as one of the best tourism attractions that you have. So there is really a history. It's walking into the past and walking from the past into the future, looking at Havana from all aspects. And it is, as I said, going to be quite huge because we will be having a lot of international representation coming to Cuba and particularly to Havana at that time to look at this huge celebration and looking at partnering how it is that Havana is looking at moving forward for the next 500 years.
Great indeed. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be moving more towards the conclusion of this conversation with Ambassador Shope, Linney, representing South Africa in Cuba and Dominican Republic. Let's take a break. The Diplomat is on until 12 midday Central African time. This is the hour where we look into issues of diplomacy, and today we are honored to have in studio Her Excellency Ambassador Shope, Linney, representing South Africa in Cuba and the Dominican Republic. Ambassador, the recent activities, or let me say developments in South Africa of attacks on foreign nationals have raised eyebrows across the world. In your view, what can South Africa do to bring the storm to calm or to resuscitate the unity that we had? Because people have been assisting us in the days of apartheid, and here they are now. They are in South Africa, and we are turning against them.
Well, I think first and foremost, what is happening in South Africa needs to be put into the correct context, and it's not the first time that these violent events are happening.
Yeah.
And I really think that it is the responsibility really of all of us as South Africans, our media, our leadership, the community, people in the community, to address the problem where the problem actually is.
Yes.
We need to take into consideration that criminal elements have taken over the problem. They have now it is being perceived as South Africans are fighting African nationals, which is not true. Because if you ask any ordinary South African, we've always lived with foreigners. We don't have problems with having foreigners. But the issue is, amongst the foreigners that live in South Africa, just like in South Africa, we have our own rotten apples. You do have rotten apples amongst the foreigners who are living in South Africa. And the consequences of the actions that they take are very dire. The issue of drugs, the issue of criminality, but it should never be interpreted as if it is only the foreign nationals who are bringing drugs to South Africa. It is only the African foreign nationals who are criminals. Criminals are criminals, as we always say. It doesn't matter what country they come from. So when we report on such incidents, I think it's very important to report them in the correct context, put the whole package, that these type of actions lead to these type of consequences, and these type of consequences lead to these type of actions by the community, and then you have the retaliatory actions by the foreign nationals, African foreign nationals who live in South Africa, and now it is spreading onto the continent. And it is happening like this, as I say, because the criminal element has taken over. It is not your ordinary peace-loving Nigerian who is burning whatever South African properties that we have in Lagos or wherever it is else that they may be doing so. It is the criminal elements of Nigeria. It is the criminal elements in our countries who are from all over the world, and it's not only Africa also. It's very important to take that into consideration. The criminal elements that exist in South Africa are from all over the world. So when we report about these things, we should report about what is happening, why the communities are reacting in this way, and also to condemn the criminal activities that our people and other nationals who are living in South Africa are getting into. So when I watch the news, I see all of the time this thing of South Africans are fighting, and there's always this South Africans are fighting African nationals, or this is Afrophobia. This is what, but we don't have the whole story. You know, like why we say that this whole thing started with the killing of a taxi driver who was stopping drugs being sold to a child. And he was killed. And then this whole thing erupted. So which means addressing the issues of why it is that our people end up also, whether it is jealousy, envy, etc., not liking foreign nationals who are legal in South Africa, who are law-abiding in South Africa, who have their own spaza shops. What is it that our people need? What is it that our principals at community level need to address in terms of the needs of our people? What is it that these foreign nationals who leave their countries to come to South Africa, what are they running away from? Because many of them, it is not political, it is economic. They're economic immigrants. So why do they have to leave their countries? So our leaders also need to get together to say, listen, your people are leaving your country because you are not addressing ABCD, and they're all ending up in South Africa. And we in South Africa, we also have our own problems that we still need to address. And maybe we have not addressed them fast enough. We have not addressed them adequately enough. We are also learning. We are also suffering as a nation in terms of fulfilling the needs of our own people. So all of these things brush against each other. And logically, once they erupt, they do not erupt looking or being addressed as really these are economic problems that we're dealing with. They then get on this name of xenophobia, and South Africans do not like foreigners. We've lived with foreigners for a long time, even during the years of apartheid. So it should be understood that South Africans do not hate foreigners. Doesn't matter where they come from. We do not hate foreigners. What we do not accept is that our communities should be flooded by drugs. Our communities should be flooded by human traffickers. That our children should be human trafficked to all over all places of the world, and not only Africa, all over the world. So those are the things that we are fighting against. And together, the communities need to get together to resolve the issue. Those who do bad need to accept that their countrymen are also doing bad. So let us be honest about where the problem is, and let us together resolve this thing, because we'll continue living together whether we like it or not.
Very much true. And as a radio personality, I feel like emphasize on the issue of reporting, because what the media says is what people believe.
Exactly.
And last week there was an alarm that was raised on social media about children being abducted in schools, only to find out that that was not true.
Exactly.
So the way we use media platforms, it should be done in a very responsible way.
Actually, there's a news clip by the BBC that was showing a building that was burning, and it went viral on social media, and it was been saying, the South African embassy in Nigeria being burned, and it was not true. That was somewhere in India, and it was in the early hours of the morning that I got this clip from a colleague. She's the honorary consul of Mali, and she's in Haiti. She's Haitian, and she was saying, "Oh, my dear ambassador, my condolences." Then I just said to her, "I am actually looking at the news. I'm not hearing anything. I do not think this is in South Africa." So the role of social media is also, the role that social media plays is also very dangerous, because unfortunately you cannot control social media, because it is individuals who write whatever it is that they want to write. But this also exacerbates the current situation where it starts creating this need for tit for tat. You kill my people, I'll also kill your people, or you've killed me, that I'll also, and it's so totally unnecessary. So our mainstream media really needs to take on this task of ensuring that even if they know about social media clips that are false, we also need to report them. We do not have to depend just on the BBCs. Our own media need to say, we know that there's such a clip going on. This is not true. Please do not take such media, such information seriously. It's fake news, as we say.
Very important indeed. You are jetting off back to Cuba this evening. What are you looking forward to? Are there any specific projects that you are going to work on?
As I said, in November, we will be celebrating the 500 years of Havana, the 25 years of relations between Cuba and South Africa. And we are hoping that we will be having quite a high-level delegation representing South Africa during that time. And we are really looking forward to this, because for us, anything that we celebrate with Cuba, particularly that shows the strong relations that exist between South Africa and Cuba, we do it with a lot of energy and a lot of love.
Actually, I'm inviting myself.
You'll be very welcome. Come and report from that side.
I'm inviting myself.
Definitely come. Sorry, we can report from that.
Ambassador, it has been great chatting to you this morning. I wish you all the best. And we hope to see you again.
In November.
Lovely. In November. I'm going to see you again in November.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of the day and have a safe trip back to Cuba.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Okay, sure.